is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening to you. Welcome to Cross Question, LBC's political panel debate show. Joining me in the studio for the next hour, Jacqui Smith, former Home Secretary and co-presenter of the yet-to-be award-winning podcast For the Many. Zack Polanski is a Green Party candidate. Nimco Ali, co-founder of Daughters of Eve and an anti-FGM campaigner. And Christian May, a voice you will know from our business bulletins on LBC. He's editor of City AM. You can, of course, watch our proceedings on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, on the YouTube channel, Facebook page or Twitter feed. But most important of all, we want your calls. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call here on LBC.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Right, let's get underway. Welcome to you all. Anthony is in Staines. Anthony, what would you like to ask?
Yes, good evening, Iain, and good evening, panel.
Hi.
My question is, if the Tories win next week and with a majority this time, what will be their big economic idea? Could it be a new Thatcherite privatisation programme?
Not sure what there's left to privatise. Christian May will tell us.
Well, I'll tell you what, I would imagine if you look at the state of the manifestos, the Tory party manifesto was criticised by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, but it was criticised less than Labour's manifesto. It was deemed to be a sort of steady-as-you-go pitch. The numbers, if you put it in crude terms, were a little bit smaller, to say the least, than the ones pledged and thrown around by Labour's manifesto. I think that one of the consequences of Labour's gargantuan spending promises and offers was that it gave the Tories a little bit of headroom to make some of their own, while still seeming, at least on the scale of Labour's proposition, to be somewhat more restrained. So I don't think they have a great central, a revolutionary proposition, other than their pledge to keep taxes low, not to raise VAT, national insurance, income tax. I think that's a sort of quite a traditional Tory economic message. It might not be terribly exciting, but they're hoping that it's deemed to be more credible and more attractive than the alternatives.
Could that not be a very big weakness, though? Because Labour have got these eye-catching policies, and I mean, we can debate about how they're going to be paid for, but do you think those have cut through in a way that the Tory manifesto hasn't?
I don't think Labour's manifesto has actually done them many favours, and I was doing a spot of broadcast elsewhere on the day of their manifesto launch, and I felt instinctively that they'd overreached with it. And the more I see about focus groups and talking to candidates who are knocking on doors, there is a sense that the public are not daft. The sums offered, the ideas on offer, the wholesale nationalisation agenda, the free this, that and everything else, I think people are quite legitimately saying, well, how are you going to pay for this? And even, can we even trust you to deliver on this? I mean, some of this is simply something which just looks too complicated, and maybe there isn't the clamour for it in the way that there is if you're ideologically in favour of nationalisation. So I don't think Labour have actually won over a huge amount of people with their promises. Okay. I think people are sceptical.
Jacqui Smith, when you look at the Labour manifesto, obviously very eye-catching, but do you think the Tories might actually benefit from having a more of a steady-as-she-goes manifesto?
Well, I'm not sure it is steady for the economy, because I think their big idea is to take us out of the EU, to reduce our growth rates, to take us out of the largest trading bloc in the world, and then to fail to negotiate a trade deal and essentially crash us out on no-deal terms at the end of 2020. That's
You're attributing a lot of things to them.
That's going to be the most significant economic shock for the country over the next 5 years if the Tories, unfortunately, next week end up winning.
Now, Anthony talked about privatisation there. He thinks that could facilitate a lot more spending. Obviously, Labour have put anti-privatisation of the NHS at the centre of their campaign. But is there an awful lot more that they could privatise, raise a lot of revenue to spend on other things?
Do you mean that is there much more the Tories could privatise? I don't think there is. I think Labour have actually broken through. I agree with some of the criticisms that Christian made about Labour's manifesto, but I think an area where Labour is getting some traction is around the protection of the NHS, particularly vis-à-vis what might happen in the case of a trade deal with the US, and worries about the levels of investment and the extent to which that's going to be focused on NHS patients as opposed to supporting more private sector involvement in the NHS.
Okay, Nimco Ali, I know you've been around the country talking to people during the election campaign, knocking on doors. What do you hear about the respective Tory and Labour pledges? How are they going down with people, do you find?
Well, I've just been campaigning for people that I know, so I haven't been up and down the country, and specifically just selling people that I think would be great candidates and great MPs. Ultimately, I do think, as somebody that is a lifelong Labour voter, it's quite hard to vote Labour at this upcoming election. Probably in my local constituency, I probably will, but ultimately, I don't want a Jeremy Corbyn government in on the 13th of December.
So why would you, if you don't want a Jeremy Corbyn government, why would you then vote Labour where you are locally?
Because I think the idea is the fact that it is the best local candidate to send to Parliament. So I think the fact that, New Labour changed the premise of how we look at things in a prime ministerial system compared to a presidential system. I don't want, if it meant that my local constituency was going to give Labour a majority, I probably wouldn't vote. But ultimately, I do think that the candidate is somebody that I know in Labour in Bristol West, and she is a great candidate, and she's not a Corbynista, which is I'm thankful for.
Now, I'm just going to warn everyone else, if you mention a constituency, we then have to read out all the other candidate names. So you've just committed a cardinal sin.
Sorry, I'm so
Don't worry, because I did it myself the other day. So, Zack Polanski, now you are a candidate in this election, so
I'll be extra careful.
What are you hearing on the doorstep from people about the two parties' economic policies? And I mean, if we go back to the question, if the Tories win, could they see privatisation as a silver bullet to facilitate extra spending?
Yeah, so that conditional if is terrifying. The threat of Brexit is looming and our democracy is under attack. This Conservative government have shown us that they can't be trusted on the economy. In fact, they can be trusted on little. When we look at Boris Johnson as mayor, for instance, he said that he would end rough sleeping within 3 years. Rough sleeping and homelessness has rocketed up. I was out yesterday in Bristol West, which I can mention because Nimco just mentioned it, campaighding for our Green candidate there.
Well, should we get this over and done with now? Labour candidates is Thangam Debonair, Conservatives Saria Adjula, Greens Carla Denyer, and the Brexit Party Neil Hipkiss. So there we are, we've fulfilled our public duty.
Fantastic. And knocking on the door there, I heard equal amounts genuinely of people who were terrified about a Tory government and people who were terrified about a Jeremy Corbyn government. As a Green candidate, that becomes an easy thing to say, well, actually, it doesn't have to be one of these two. The first past the post system for years has created this duopoly, but actually the Labour candidate in my area, who I won't mention or mention my area, he said at Hustings the other day when I gave him an Iain Dale type interrogation about proportional representation, he said, actually, this has become a doorstep issue now. This was a Labour candidate saying this. He said that the time for first past the post was up, the game was up, and actually people were demanding a fair voting system. I think that fair voting system shows that we can take action on the climate emergency by people voting Green.
Zack, if you want to stop Brexit, why are you campaigning in Bristol West against a Labour candidate who is a Remainer?
Because I think ultimately in Bristol West, particularly our local candidate there has a strong record on the council. In fact, she's achieved more as a councillor in getting a climate emergency declared than in fact any Labour MP. So I think it's shown that actually she can make this incredible change. I've also heard a lot of nervousness about the Lib Dem position, this idea of revoking Article 50. Now, there's no Lib Dem on the panel to defend it, but the candidate in my area has said multiple times, we won't revoke Article 50. It'll only be if we win a Lib Dem majority, and we all know that's not going to happen. I do think, though, it's disingenuous and it's also unhelpful to democratic politics to suggest that revoking Article 50 and just getting rid of Brexit without another second referendum is a big problem, which is why the Green Party is saying we will have a people's vote, and we're the only party unambiguously campaigning to remain. As we know, Jeremy Corbyn is choosing to remain neutral.
But if you want to get the most realistic way of getting a people's vote is to vote Labour.
I don't think it's realistic, though, to keep voting Labour, because I think actually Labour have shown us they're completely off the table on Brexit.
Can I just tell our caller one thing that I think the Tories should privatise?
Go on.
Royal Bank of Scotland.
Would anyone want to buy it now?
There you go. Well, give people a chance. I think if you hold on to it for so long and you think you might make a profit, you're probably going to be holding on to it for a while. But I think it's time to get red.
And how much would it raise, do you think?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I tell you, there would be, and this might not win much support, but there would be a group of people who would probably do quite well out of it, with the investment bankers involved in discharging that sale. But there would, I'm sure, be some billions of value that the Treasury could call in on that investment, and I think it's time to do so.
Okay.
I think we should be worried too. I overheard Liz Truss in a restaurant talking to Stephen Swinford, the Telegraph journalist, a few months ago.
This is going to be good.
Come on, Zack.
We're all agog now.
I tweeted about it at the time. She said that
Actually, I
she
think I
wanted
remember this.
private companies to start buying things like our motorway, so we might have McDonald's motorway. This is in what they've been doing in America with Burger King potholes and things like that. I think that's a horrendous vision for the
Why?
future of our country, because I think there are public roads. We own them. They're not for sale. And I think the idea that we're just going to sell off public assets, to the highest bidder is a pretty sad and grim vision of Trump's Britain, not even Boris Johnson's Britain.
The LBC M25. Half of our listeners are on the M25 as we speak.
Since I'm on the show, I'll let you have that
Right,
one.
can we agree that we're not to mention the words Bristol and West in the same sentence in the rest of the programme?
We can do that.
Excellent. Anthony, just a quick word from you.
Yes, I think there are quite a few things that could be sold. I mean, you did mention the roads, so Highways England could be one, the Environment Agency, and a sliver of Network Rail. That could bring in quite a few billions, and the Port of Dover.
Well, I agree with you on the Port of Dover. Well, in fact, the Port of Dover, is that still a trust port? I used to be, many moons
It's your
ago,
specialist subject,
I was responsible for the privatisation, or partly responsible for the privatisation of Britain's trust ports, but I can't remember whether Dover was one of them. I don't think it was, actually. You're right, Anthony. Richard is in Birmingham. Hi, Richard.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Not at all. What would you like to ask?
My question really is for Jacqui Smith and the rest of the panel. I'm a surgeon and a surgical trainee, and I was present at a lecture that Jacqui Smith gave over a year ago about projected demands on healthcare in the West Midlands, and the figures were absolutely frightening, really, in terms of the increase in the number of over 85s, the number of the increase in people with diabetes, and the pressure that the NHS is under now is staggering, and I don't believe that any party really has a proper plan for the NHS. I think we hear lots of sound bites from both Labour and Conservatives, but it's a bit of a ticking time bomb in my opinion, and I just feel we're reaching the perfect storm. We have a situation at the moment where we have increased demands at the front door. We've got a lack of beds. We've got longer waiting times. We've got senior doctors reducing their job plans because of punitive tax reforms and people taking early retirement. And it was just really a general question for the panel about what their feelings were and how the NHS is going to cope going forward, because I just think it's in real trouble at the minute.
Can I recommend that you listen to the last hour of our programme last night that we did, because we did a phone-in on just trying to calm the debate down on the NHS and say, well, how would you like to form the debate over the next few years? Because at the moment it is just sort of one side saying you're going to privatise everything and the other side... So people are in such entrenched positions, aren't they?
The problem is that the NHS for years has been, or since its conception, has been used as a political football, and what it needs is complete reform, and it needs to be stopped being taken under party control, and there needs to be a cross-party decision about how to take it forward in the future.
Okay, all right.
If it's going to be sustainable. So I would have listened. I listen most days, but unfortunately
there's always catch up, Richard. Don't forget that. Are you Richard's boss, Jacqui?
Oh, well, I don't know, because Richard hasn't said where.
He's from Birmingham.
Well,
because you just declare your interest here.
Yeah, so I'm the chair of University Hospitals Birmingham NHS Trust, which is one of the largest trusts, NHS trusts in England. And Richard, thanks for coming to my lecture. And what you'll remember I said actually was that I thought that the ageing population in some ways is a sort of credit to the NHS, because it's a success that people are getting older. But of course, you're right that people get older, but they then live with a range of different conditions that need to be dealt with by the NHS. You're also right. I incidentally in the lecture, you'll remember I also talked about the sort of scandal of inequality, that if you're in Birmingham, you can travel 6 stops on the train and be in an area where you would have 9 years fewer, less life expectancy. So we've got a real problem of inequality in the health system as well. And the only answer to that is yes, more money for the NHS, and that is something that Labour's promising in this election. But we work closely, I'm glad to say, in Birmingham with Birmingham City Council and with Solihull Council. And, the NHS is under financial pressure, but those councils are under enormous pressure from the cuts that they've faced. And that means not only difficulty with social care, keeping people out of hospital in the first place, getting people out of hospital at the end of their care. But it also means not enough investment in good housing, in jobs, in providing exercise for people, all the other things that are going to impact on your health as well. And what we need is really radically to look at not just getting people better when they get ill, but keeping them well for longer as well.
Nimco Ali, do you get frustrated by the level of debate, particularly in this election campaign on the NHS?
No, what I get frustrated about is the level of credit that's not being given to somebody like Matt Hancock, who's actually incredible Secretary of State for Health. I think we do need a health service for the 21st century, and because it's such a sacrilegious cow, anytime anybody talks about the NHS, it comes about the conversation about privatization. We need it we need to make it more modern and actually spend more money on public health. So we're talking about things like diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is one of the biggest costs to the NHS, and a lot of that is nothing to do with poverty. It's actually to do with self-responsibility, and we're not having conversations about the fact that I come from a community where many of the most neglected diseases, which are kind of induced, are common. So whether it's obesity, whether it's to do with diabetes, a lot of these things that we're not having the conversation. So if we start if we start looking at the NHS as an asset and not something that we shouldn't be touching, but something we need to improve, I think it can be something that we need to be celebrating. And ultimately, I know it's not for sale. And one of the things that I constantly seem to be editing myself on Instagram at the moment and on Twitter and on all these places, because I think you kind of create the communities which you have on social media. And a lot of my friends are still Labour voting. They're still buying the rhetoric of the fact that the NHS is for sale. The NHS is not for sale, but the NHS needs upgrading. And I think the only party that's going to do that, it is the Conservative Party. And for somebody like me to say that, it's quite shocking. There was a BBC programme recently called Who Are You Calling Fat? And I watched it with one of my friends, and there was a 25-year-old young woman who was more than 32 stones. That's that should be the things that should be horrifying us. And the idea, the fact that we keep talking about body positivity and all these other kind of conversations, we are setting ourselves up for the next 20 years for a massively obese community because of the fact that we're not having conversations. And we keep talking about the NHS being for sale rather than saying that NHS really needs updating. And none of you are going to talk about that because of the fact that you're all going to take party lines. I'm a non-tribal...
Nimco, I did talk about it. I did talk about it.
And I'm about to talk about it.
No. I mean, none of you are not going to talk about it without your political lines, rather than saying the fact that as a 36-year-old woman, I don't mind paying more taxes. I don't mind doing all these things, but let's have a real conversation on the fact that who is the NHS in better hands with? I think at the moment, somebody like Matt Hancock that understands that technology.
But you're going to vote Labour. I don't get this. It's totally illogical.
But it's not illogical, because the whole point is the fact that we live in a world where the fact that you vote for your local constituent, who's the best person in I don't know my Conservative local MP. I know the Labour MP. I know what she does. I know all those things. So I can kind of assume that what she's doing. But ultimately, who do I want in part? Who do I want in government? I don't want the shadow health secretary to be in charge of the health service on December 13th.
He's one of the more sensible ones, Jonathan Ashworth.
He's got some excellent ideas.
Zack, Polanski. I don't know what the Green Party policy is on the NHS.
Well, that very briefly is to spend £6 billion a year on it, and an extra £1 billion a year which is on nursing training. But can I just say, I actually applaud Nimco's stance, which is to say I support a party, but actually I'm going to vote for a local MP. I wish more people would do that and not just vote for as if we're voting for a president, but vote for the local candidate. My boyfriend works for the NHS, but I don't need him to come home at night and tell me how much the NHS is on its knees, how much doctors and nurses are in shortages, how lack of beds there are, the kind of money situation going on. So whilst I agree with Nimco on that, I can't agree that NHS staff that I've spoken to think that Matt Hancock or Jeremy Hunt have been a great health secretary. They think quite the opposite. The thing I would say in point of consensus, though, is the thing that often doesn't get talked about with the NHS that I just want to put on the table is about mental health. It's this idea that actually if you break a leg or break an arm, you wouldn't ever think to say to someone, oh, we'll see you in a few months. Whereas if someone has a mental issue, then there seems to have been this culture previously that said, oh, actually, you can wait a few months down the line. And actually, that's just very expensive for the NHS for everything else. And plus, it's awful for the human being. So I think one thing that the Green Party would do, and I'm glad to hear other parties talking about this too, is actually put mental health and physical health in parity. So to answer Nimco's challenge kind of very directly, this isn't even necessarily a party line. I don't think party politics is what's going to solve the NHS. I also don't think privatising the NHS and giving it into the hands of Conservative politicians is going to do it much good either. I think it has to be about actually people working in the NHS who are on the ground, asking them through assemblies or just through forums what they think the best thing is to do, and crucially making it more localised. So asking local doctors or local hospitals what do they think is in the best area and how do they want to operate, and supporting them with that.
The interesting thing is that I think I'm right in saying that none of the three of you so far have actually mentioned outcomes and quality of care. It's all been about process. It's all been about structure. Surely the main priority here has to be to look at how can we get the best outcomes for patients to make sure they have the best possible care. And none of
I'll take that challenge. I think it's the opposite, actually. I think it's about prevention. So outcomes, of course, is very, very important. But I think if we're going to spend any money and any extra focus, then I think it needs to look at preventative care, whether that's education or making sure that there aren't these problems in the first place. Nimco mentions diabetes. That's a huge problem in the NHS, and actually there is lots more we could be doing. But that requires political will, and right now, it just isn't there.
To be fair, Ian, I did talk about an NHS which has kept people alive for longer, but where we need to make sure that that's a quality life. And I also talked about making sure that where you live doesn't determine how long you live. And that's a massively important outcome, which I don't think we've yet got to grips with in the NHS.
Christian?
The NHS, to my mind, suffers undoubtedly because of its political status. And there's no way around that, because it's always going to be run by a Whitehall department. There's always going to be a party in government. And I don't think either party fully cover themselves in glory during election campaigns on the NHS in particular. And whether that's the Tory muddle over 50,000 versus 30,000 nurses, or 40 new hospitals versus upgrades, or indeed, I have to say, Labour's quite appalling scaremongering over the potential sale of the NHS. And indeed, imagine the Labour Party emailing people and claiming that if you have cancer under a Tory government, you will receive a bill in the post for your care, I think is absolutely appalling. Now, the other issue, of course, is about the longer term situation. And to my mind, the NHS and the issues facing it cannot be dealt with by a 5-year term or in a party manifesto or a chapter of that manifesto. And so surely there must be some need now, taking into account social care as well. In addition to the increasing funding for certain services and locations that require them, there must now be a need for something this country doesn't do terribly well, of a genuinely cross-party and independent commission to consider the options, to look at outcomes and how they can be improved, because they're not terribly good in a lot of corners of the NHS, despite best efforts. But the longer-term funding settlement, and to ask the people the question, how much are you prepared to pay? How much reform are you prepared to countenance? Do you want to have a conversation about the aspects of insurance provision or other service provision without it turning into a horror story of bills and privatisation, because that simply isn't the case. And until that conversation can take place, and I don't think the questions that everybody is raising about this are going to be dealt with satisfactorily.
What would you make to the point that many people made? In fact, Richard made it to an extent, and many people did last night. You've got to take the politics out of the NHS, have it run by an independent board. And I said, well, that kind of is how it is in England now, where you have NHS England, which has a chief executive, and they are one step removed from the politicians. But if you're spending £130 billion, there has to be political accountability, doesn't there?
I'm sorry, I wholly disagree, and I suspect that the lecture that Richard came to see me deliver was called "The NHS Will Always Be a Political Football," because, you know, it was a political decision that set up the NHS in the first place. It spends, as you say, Ian, an enormous amount of taxpayers' money. It's there at the most difficult times of your life, when you're born, when you give birth, when you die. Frankly, if that's not the business of politicians, I don't know what is. And I accept the challenge that you need long-term policies. But this is the stuff of politics. And I don't believe that giving it to some independent body is the way that you're going to safeguard the future of the
Zack,
NHS.
you're nodding your head on that. Do you both agree?
Can I just say, we need to be able to kick them out is the other big thing. So I agree with Jacqui.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily advocating that every element of healthcare needs to be run by a quango. I mean, I'm not a big advocate of that kind of management of services in this country, but I'm talking about trying to establish a consensus on the 20-year funding model, the way in which social care, local authority care and support, and indeed emergency care is going to be integrated, because those are the sorts of things which are just simply not going to be solved over the dispatch box. They're not.
OK, keep your calls coming. 0345 6060 973. Richard, thank you for that. Let's go to Thomas in Birmingham. This is an interesting question. Hi, Thomas.
Hi.
Hi, you don't work for Jacqui Smith as well, do you?
Good turnout from Birmingham today.
I'm unemployed. I wanted to ask, how do you guys feel about bold claims being made by election leaflets so close to the election day?
What a shame we don't have a Liberal Democrat on the panel today.
Dodgy bar chart.
Nimco Ali, this has become a bit of a thing in this election campaign, isn't it? Where all the parties are accused of sending leaflets which are at the very best misleading, at the worst telling absolute lies. There's been a story out today where newspapers are being sent to various constituencies around London, which seem to be encouraging people to vote Liberal Democrat, but they're not from the Liberal Democrats. They're from some new thing called Advance Together, which is staffed by ex-Liberal Democrats. It's all a bit bizarre.
It is a bizarre. I haven't heard anything about this, but I think ultimately this is why critical thinking is a key educational tool that we should be allowing people to have. I think the reality is that we don't necessarily have as much information as we think we do, and I think a lot of us are voting with our guts. And so I stood in the 2017 election for the Women's Equality Party, and one of the things I saw at that time was how tribal things are. And somebody wrote today that she's going to vote Labour holding her nose because it's like a bad date. I'm like, if it's a bad date, leave. I think the reality is that we all need to start going. Yeah, it was. Yeah. So the reality is that as somebody who is as conflicted as many many electors are at the moment, I think ultimately the reality is that we've already chosen who we're going to vote for and how we're going to do it. And come December the 12th, I don't necessarily think as many of these things that are coming through our posts are going to change our minds.
Zack, Polanski, have you ever used a dodgy bar chart?
No, not.
Oh, you used to be a Liberal Democrat.
I did used to be a Liberal Democrat.
You probably have used dodgy bar charts.
I think even when I was a Liberal Democrat, had I seen a dodgy bar chart, I wouldn't have allowed it to go out in my name. So, look, since 1950, 63% of the time we've had Tory governments, despite in 18 of 19 of those elections, the majority of the country have voted left or left of centre. Again, I'm talking about proportional representation, but the reason for it is this. I think the education piece that Nimco says, and she's absolutely right, is lacking because the majority of people do not have a vote that counts in this country. And I think it's unsurprising then that people become uninterested in politics, they become detached, and then actually politicians dumb down their literature because they're talking to a constituency that is unengaged. So I think there has to be a bit of push and pull on both sides. I think it's about people taking responsibility for challenging their local MPs, but absolutely, I think every single politician, no matter what party they have full responsibility for the literature that goes out in their name and to call it out. I'll also give kudos to our co-leader, Sian Berry, who in her tweets, someone can probably find one that contradicts this, but she avoids the language of battles and fights because she just says it's unhelpful to politics, and actually we should find a collaborative language that's visionary and futuristic. Now, I'm not going to say I've never fallen foul of writing the wrong tweet, but I certainly am very cognizant of making sure my tweets are as polite and collaborative as possible.
But can I say, in this election, I don't necessarily think a lot of people know who's standing in their local constituency as an MP, as an individual. I don't look for specific people. I won't mention the names just in case you have to list everybody else who's standing in that constituency.
It's a long programme.
But I went door knocking for somebody this afternoon, and they were like, "Is he Conservative?" And I was like, "Yes." And she's like, "No, thank you." So they have no idea who the local candidates are, and I think that's actually quite shocking because
it's very easy to find out, isn't it?
Pardon?
It's very easy.
It is very easy. No, but the whole point is so it doesn't matter what comes in the post. I think people have already decided through non-post, through TV, through radio stations that they've listened to, other kind of things. Is the fact that who they're voting for. So I don't think that literature is very helpful, but ultimately I don't actually think that we're having a very informed electorate at the moment, and that is something that's quite scary as somebody that values our democracy and values our democratic process.
Agreed.
Zack, I'm going to mention the constituency that you're standing in because it is one of those that I think a lot of people are going to be looking at on election night. Cities of London and Westminster, where Chuka Umunna is standing for the Liberal Democrats, Nikki Aitken is standing for the Conservatives, and we'll get
Gordon Ardell.
Well done.
For Labour.
I mean, as an ex-Liberal Democrat, you, by standing for the Green Party, are possibly going to guarantee a Tory victory, aren't you? Because if you had stood down, a lot of your votes might have gone to Chuka Umunna and he might beat the Tory. Do you not feel a bit responsible, I mean, if that happens?
No, I don't feel responsible at all. I don't think that's a realistic scenario. I think, first of all, the idea that a Green stands down, we don't know where my votes would go to. I'm sure I've got people who have voted Labour,
well,
people
we have
who have
the
voted
Remain Alliance, so presumably the idea of that is that your votes would go to the Liberal Democrats.
But in my constituency, that's not part of the Remain Alliance. So the Remain Alliance was in 60 seats where the leadership decided those were good seats to have a Remain Alliance, where both sides would receive another seat stood down for them. Actually, this one wasn't one of those, and that's because we think there's a huge important case.
Because you put your foot down.
No, not that at all. I actually had nothing to do with those negotiations.
Can I ask you about the votes in this constituency? Because talk about dodgy claims. I think, at the top of my head, the Tories, although they've changed candidates now, are on about 18,000 at the last election. Labour on about 14,000. Lib Dems down at about 4,000. And I suspect the Greens somewhere beneath that. So, talking about dodgy claims, I'm interested that Hugh Grant and others have said that only the Liberal Democrats can take away a Tory MP from that constituency. When clearly, I mean, certainly at last count, Labour are only 4,000 votes behind the Tories, and the Liberal Democrats about 14,000 votes.
Well, can I just respond to that as well, though? Because I think this constituency is an example of exactly what Nimco was just talking about how politics is hectic. I've only been standing there just under 2 years, which isn't a long time. I'm the longest standing candidate. The Labour candidate resigned over some sexual harassment allegations. Conservative candidate was Mark Field, who allegedly, or we all saw, pushed a woman against a wall. And the Liberal Democrat candidate stood aside for an ex-Labour candidate to become a Liberal Democrat. It's a very, very hectic election.
You can't criticise that, given you used to be a Liberal Democrat and you're now a Green.
I'm not criticising that at all.
Do you have any residual Liberal Democrat sort of thoughts in your mind? Any sort of?
I'd say.
What does it sound like?
I feel like I'm being teased here, so I'll say this. This is controversial, and it's not often that candidates praise other candidates, but I think Chuck Ramoon has been very brave. He was in the Labour Party for 22 years,
Alliance coming out.
and then he moved to Liberal Democrats. Now, I don't agree with him on lots of things, and our hustings has certainly been...
Well, I tell you what, if he loses by 20 votes on election night, you'll be first on the programme.
If he loses by 20 votes, then I will be happy to say that there was a really good argument for a Green to be stood there to argue against the climate emergency, to say that actually this has to be the climate election.
Right,
the Lib Dems aren't making it the climate election.
We need to go to a news bulletin. We'll let Jacqui and Christian answer this briefly after the news. It's 8:33. Let's get the news headlines from LBC's Serena Farrow.
NATO's 70th anniversary summit has been overshadowed by disagreements, including Donald Trump calling the Canadian Prime Minister two-faced. The US President has since been overheard saying the comment was funny. An inquest has heard how the two victims of the London Bridge terror attack died from shock and hemorrhaging after being stabbed in the chest. 25-year-old Jack Merritt and Saskia Jones, who was 23, were both killed by Usman Khan last Friday. And the England and Wales Cricket Board say they're deeply saddened by the death of a legend of English cricket following the passing of Bob Willis. The former national team captain has died at the age of 70. LBC weather, well, windy with showers tonight, some heavy in the north. Clear spells and patchy frost overnight with a low of -3 degrees.
This is LBC.
Here's the thing. How can BT Superfast Fibre and our powerful smart hub with a Which Best Buy be so affordable? Simple. When we do Black Friday, we do it properly. $24.99 a month for 24 months with a $19.99 setup fee. It's our lowest ever fibre price. Less than you'd expect for broadband this good. Offer ends 7th of December. Search BT Broadband.
CPI increase each March starting 2020. New customers was $29.99 per month over 24 months, $37.99 per month, 25 terms apply.
Marooned in deep space and no sign of help? Don't panic. And with the AA, the app lets you track the mechanic right to your side.
I'm thinking of joining the AA.
I don't think they accept cats as members.
Who said anything about being a member? I want one of those shiny yellow jackets. Ow!
There are lots of smart reasons to join the AA. You'll get unlimited call-outs, our Tap and Track app, and we'll get you going again in around 30 minutes of arrival. Switch to a different kind of breakdown service from just £5 a month. Visit theaa.com. New customers only. T's and C's apply.
Ho, ho, ho. Who's made a list this year?
I want a new phone. One with amazing cameras, ultra-wide lens, of course, live focus video. Well, it has to be 5G ready to stream all my films. Can it come with something awesome to listen to them through?
Darling, I think he was talking to the kids.
Get everything you want and more. Purchase a Samsung 5G ready device and claim a pair of silver wireless Galaxy Buds at no extra cost. Shop our 5G handsets in store or online at your local Vodafone store or vodafone.co.uk. 18 plus. Offer excludes Galaxy Fold 5G. Purchased by the 25th of the 12th 19. Claim from Samsung within 30 days. T's and C's apply.
Let the festivities begin with a third off our wonderful range of artificial trees and Christmas lights. Homebase. Feels good to be home. Terms at homebase.co.uk.
The S in Audi S-Line stands for many things like sporty, stylish, streamlined, and now seductively priced. Like the new Audi A4 S-Line, which you can now have from £359 per month, £2,154 initial rental. Test drive one at your local Audi centre, but you'll have to be swift. The offer ends soon. Search Audi S-Line. Audi. Vorsprung durch Technik. With 48-month contract hire, 10,000 miles per annum, 18s and over, subject to status, damage charges may apply, no ownership. Ordered by 31st of December 2019 from participating centres. Audi Financial Services, visit audi.co.uk.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:36. Don't forget you can watch us on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, the YouTube channel, Facebook page or Twitter feed. 0345 6060973 if you'd like to ask our panel a question. With me, Jacqui Smith, Zack Polanski from the Green Party, Nimco Ali, anti-FGM campaigner and Christian May, editor of City AM. There are lots of candidates in the cities of London and Westminster. Let's go through them. Conservative Nikki Aiken, Christian Peoples, should that be Alliance? I don't know.
Yes,
Jill McLachlan. Labour, Gordon Nardell. Green Party, Zack Polanski. Liberal Democrats, Chuka Amuna. And Liberal, Dirk van Heck. Now, we were talking about dodgy bar charts and bold claims being made in election literature. Jacqui Smith, I can't imagine that you've ever made a dodgy claim in your election literature.
Pure as a driven snow, Ian. What I will say...
it's just my agent did it.
Nothing to do with me, Gov. I wouldn't argue with Nimco about the need for better education, political education in schools. I mean, I was in the Department for Education and the Minister who introduced citizenship education into schools, pretty much hollowed out by Michael Gove's reforms to the curriculum after 2010, incidentally. But I'm also not that sort of soft about the rough and tumble of an election campaign. I'm not that bothered. I think the electorate aren't silly. I think they understand if something is or is not a fake newspaper. I mean, when I was fighting the election in Redditch, my Tory opponents, who had quite a lot of money, used to have a wrap around the local newspaper, which, at the time really, really irritated me. But I think people get that that's the way that elections are fought. And I don't have such a low view of the electorate as some people have expressed. I do, incidentally, agree that you can't trade voters as some sort of commodity. And I think this is the slight problem with the Remain Alliance and where you're right, that actually assuming that because you're not standing a candidate, people will automatically shift to another candidate, I think undermines the sort of agency and individual decisions that voters are making, and it's slightly patronising to voters to think that.
Christian?
I agree with Jacqui on this. I don't think that anybody should sort of clutch their pearls and reach for the smelling salts every time they see a slightly exaggerated claim on election leaflets or indeed on the side of a bus. This is a bit of a blood sport. And they are all over the place, of course. I mean, I think Ed Miliband, I won't say his constituency, or maybe we need to now, the names count in? I don't know.
No, you're fine.
I mean, he's said on his leaflet that he voted for a Brexit deal 8 times or something.
9
times. 9 times. No, he did
Yes.
nothing of the sort. And Yvette Cooper, in 2017 stood on a leaflet that said, "I won't frustrate Brexit." Of course, so it is up to voters to hold them to account, to challenge claims that are made on Tory leaflets as well as anybody else's. And when it comes to fake newspapers, I think they're quite creative. It's not because I edit an actual newspaper that I could clock a fake one as soon as I opened my front door and saw it lying there on the mat, featuring my local MP apparently as a guest columnist in a new newspaper that I'd never heard of before.
30 gorgeous pictures.
There's all sorts going on inside. An agony aunt and all sorts of these items. So no, I think it's more interesting to consider how and who's being targeted and micro-targeted online. It's probably having more of a reach and impact than the traditional leaflets through doors. But however you're being targeted, an engaged citizen there is an obligation to check these claims and to ask the right questions. It doesn't take a lot, and certainly if you're going to exercise your vote, I think it behoves citizens to just perhaps put the most rudimentary effort into finding out whether they're being lied to or not.
0345 6060973 is the number to call if you'd like to ask our panel a question. Sean in concert. Now, Sean, we spoke on Sunday, didn't we?
How are you?
I'm very well.
You're my favourite caller, you said.
I know.
The question is, right?
He says that to all the boys.
No, but Sean, do you realise that you went that call that you gave on Sunday? Man. It went viral.
I know. I had somebody done it the other day there, and I was listening to it.
You're famous.
But anyway, this is a serious question, right? Thank God, if Labour get into power, that they're going to get rid of universal credit, the most evil thing that the Tories have ever brought out. And a little question for the Labour as well. Isn't it about time you got rid of the assessments for disabled people?
Right. So, effectively, what should the parties do about universal credit? I'm not sure Labour have actually said they'll abolish it. Jacqui Smith?
No, I think what Labour have said is that the really serious problems with universal credit are that waiting period, which was one of the main reasons why we've seen such a growth in food banks, for example, and also some of the nature of the assessments, particularly for people with disability. They have said that they are going to, I think they have actually said they're going to get rid of it, certainly those elements of it. I think it's, there are, let's let's be clear, there are elements of universal credit which everybody thought were a good idea. The bringing together of benefits so that you don't have this sort of cliff edge between benefits is a good idea. The problem was, as soon as Iain Duncan Smith started to try to introduce it, he lost out massively to the Treasury, who removed a load of money from it. And despite, interestingly, I think Amber Rudd's efforts to try and make it slightly more humane when she was the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, she failed to do that. And that's why you've got so many people falling through gaps into really awful poverty now because of the way that universal credit has been implemented.
Christian.
I was listening to John McDonnell today speak about his pledge to abolish poverty, or at least in-work poverty, I think, in the UK, which is a bold ambition. And he stopped short of saying that he would rip up and replace universal credit. But he did say that he would seek to reform and improve. And I dare say anybody involved with the system now would say it should be reformed and improved, and there are certainly problems with its implementation. I think also, and this is going to sound quite cold-hearted, but I think universal credit has probably been a good in aggregate, but people do not live their lives in aggregate. Certainly the caller here doesn't sound like he lives his life in that way. So there are undoubted problems with it, and we'd hope that whoever forms the next government would learn from that. But the Institute for Fiscal Studies, for example, who we lean on quite heavily in the course of this election as a voice of at least reason, have said that the worst thing that you could do now would be to rip it up and start again because of another decade of change and transition that would be entailed. But they've certainly recognised the areas where it needs to be improved and reformed. Certainly that 5-week waiting period, for example. So, yes, there does need to be improvements to it, but I don't think anybody, whether it's Labour or the IFS, are advocating ripping it up or going back to what existed before.
Zack Polanski.
I'd say improvements aren't strong enough, although I understand the intention of what you're saying. 14.1 children are living in poverty. 45% of children from ethnic minority families are living in poverty. We don't
relative
just need to improve.
Poverty, not absolute
poverty. Relative poverty, absolutely. We need to rip up the entire universal credit system. The Green Party policy, and one of the ones that I'm most excited about, is actually to have a universal basic income. This, in its very basic principle, is that every person would have £89 a week. That's just initially. That would go up until 2025. They'll basically be looking to pay rent and to make sure that we've got some shelter and some food so everyone could live in some basic dignity.
But it's failed in Finland, hasn't it?
Well, I think it was just a pilot in Finland, and it was in a very specific place.
Yeah, but they haven't decided to continue with the pilot, so therefore it didn't work. Why would you want to adopt a system that in another country has proven not to work?
Well, I think it's about looking at what's not worked and making we've got a system that works right. If people want to know more detail, if I can say, the website greenparty.org.uk has our manifesto. Indeed, I did. It was seamless. But also that has all the costings on it. But essentially, I think, to come back to what Christian says, it's not easy. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that transferring the entire country's economy overnight is going to be an easy thing to do. And one of the difficult things to do is look at that transition period between now and 2025. So, for instance, WASPy women would be one of the first priorities to make sure actually in that transition they weren't being discriminated against with their pensions. But actually we found that when you keep it at £89 a week, which is a relatively moderate universal basic income initially, you can actually cost it, so it can work for everyone. That way you're making immense savings by abolishing the welfare system entirely, and that welfare system is so inhumane for the people claiming it. I think someone literally died standing in a queue for a job centre, but also it's really inhumane for the people who are assessing people and having to sit in the job centre, treating people like objects and not people. So we transform that.
Nimco.
It's really interesting. So, as somebody who's so I came to this country as refugee, as after we lost everything, and ultimately the welfare system was the saving grace. So, I'm grateful for that, and I'm somebody that pays my taxes because of the fact that I believe in the welfare system. I do think ripping up the universal credit and starting again is probably going to cripple a lot. But we also need to have a conversation about the things. So you said one of the stats which I'm not necessarily familiar with is about ethnic minority communities living in poverty. I think it's the fact that we have to have those conversations of why benefit dependency is within those communities. What is it? It's because a lot of those women are not working and are not told to be working. I think there's broader conversations that we need to be having in order to lift communities out of poverty. It's not just looking at universal credit, it's actually looking at how we've worked with communities, education systems, like, gender inequality within those communities and so on. So I don't necessarily, I understand the whole conversation around poverty and what's going on, but I don't think ripping up universal credit is the way to go, because I completely agree with what you've just said.
Okay, Sean, quick comment from you.
Yeah, just I cannot stand the lying Tories, that's all. And I just hope Labour get in. Just hope Labour get in, that's all.
I think we got that message.
Who are you supporting, sorry?
Six Hail Marys and 2 Our Fathers.
Can I just say something? As I find it really uncomfortable about the ease that people are allowed to say things like that about the Tory party. It's like, I know a lot of Tories, even though I'm not necessarily voting for one in my local community.
I think he was saying it with love in his heart.
No, but I just
maybe not.
No, I just thought as somebody that has lived on the left and is within the left in terms of my friendship, I really, really find it disheartening and really concerning the fact of the way that people can say flippant things. I have a brother that's standing within the Conservative Party, and the idea of the fact that the kind of the venom that he gets for just being a young black man that wants to express his opinion and stand for a political party, which he has the choice to do. There are people that are standing for the left who are for the Labour Party at the moment who are anti-Semitic, racist, sexist, homophobic, and they don't get anything because they're standing for a political party which people assume.
That's not true, Nimco.
Actually, they don't get anything. So I live within those communities. So as a black Muslim woman who says that she agrees with the Conservative Party on certain political points, I see men from the left who are from my own community who actually get away with a lot of stuff and nobody says anything to them. So I think it's really, it's offensive that people are allowed to call all Tories as though they're some kind of murdering scumbags, which is just not acceptable.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you about that. And Zack, incidentally, it's not just Natalie Bennett who is trying in this election campaign rightly to carry it out in a respectful way.
Natalie Bennett, you're so outdated.
Oh, sorry.
Sean Berry, also candidate for mayor while we're talking about it.
Anyway, good for her that she's doing it. And one of the other things I do as chair of the Joe Cox Foundation, and we've pushed hard in this election campaign, is precisely to ensure that it's carried out in a respectful way, regardless of what side you're coming from.
I was a Labour Party member. I was a Labour Party member for several years. I said every political ideology that I had when New Labour, which I loved, was in power, and I never ever, even to this day, even if I say I'm voting for a Labour candidate, I won't get a Tory telling me that I'm a scumbag and all these other things. If I say one thing about an incredible Conservative candidate, the level of hate and rhetoric that I get...
after this programme, if I look on your Twitter feed, I know exactly what you're going to do.
Can I just say, I agree with every word, Nimco, but Boris Johnson does also have to take responsibility for calling people pickaninnies or bum boys or letterboxes, so I agree with you.
But what's
I think the Prime Minister needs to show some leadership.
Did I mention the Prime Minister's name at the moment? I was talking about the fact that this caller was talking about getting rid of the Tories and praying.
I agree with you on that.
Patrick in Guildford says, please ask your Liberal Democrat guest how the party has the front to talk about green issues when 15 items of printed election material on virgin paper have come through my door in barely 3 weeks. Well, I think we can all probably say we've had those. We haven't got a Liberal Democrat on the panel tonight, so I think he's talking about you, Zack.
I was there for a very small period of time compared to years with the Green Party.
Right, let's take a break and we'll come back to more of your questions in a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:49.
This is LBC. Follow live, continuous coverage of LBC Election 2019.
We'll examine the party policies and check the facts.
Hearing from you about the issues that matter.
I really don't know. Don't want to waste my vote because it means so much right now.
Plus, get all the news you need about the general election in 20 minutes, every 20 minutes, on LBC's brand new sister station, LBC News.
And from now until polling day, LBC's range of podcasts will be speaking directly to those fighting for power. Listen on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't miss a moment. LBC Election 2019.
Marooned in deep space and no sign of help? Don't panic. And with the AA, the app lets you track the mechanic right to your side.
I'm thinking of joining the AA.
I don't think they accept cats as members.
Who said anything about being a member? I want one of those shiny yellow jackets. Ow!
There are lots of smart reasons to join the AA. You'll get unlimited call-outs, our tap and track app, and we'll get you going again in around 30 minutes of arrival. Switch to a different kind of breakdown service from just £5 a month. Visit theaa.com. New customers only. T's and C's apply.
Ah, the great British roast. When mobiles are set aside, the TV goes off, the family comes together, and everything stops. For the perfect roast, only Bisto Best Gravy will do. made with real meat juices for that authentic, rich roasted flavour. Ah, Bisto.
Hash browns in dressing gowns, bacon rolls and morning scrolls, sausage bagels at breakfast tables, or maybe flat whites after late nights, pancakes with news updates, flatbreads and bedheads, breakfast wraps after morning naps, or perhaps a McMuffin without leaving bed, because now we deliver instead. Download Uber Eats and enjoy McDonald's breakfast at home. At participating McDonald's, see mcdonalds.co.uk/McDelivery to see if there's one near you. Serving times and delivery fee apply. See Uber Eats app.
The S in Audi S-Line stands for many things like sporty, stylish, streamlined, and now seductively priced. Like the new Audi A4 S-Line, which you can now have from £359 per month, £2,154 initial rental. Test drive one at your local Audi centre, but you'll have to be swift. The offer ends soon. Search Audi S-Line. Audi. Vorsprung durch Technik. With 48-month contract hire, 10,000 miles per annum, 18s and over, subject to status. Damage charges may apply. No ownership. Ordered by 31st of December 2019 from participating centres. Audi Financial Services. Visit audi.co.uk.
It's hard to enjoy your daily yoga routine when your mind is on your next VAT return and how to avoid the usual mistakes. But with QuickBooks, the new VAT Smart Scan technology does the work for you. As the deadline approaches, it checks for duplicates, looks for anomalies, and reviews VAT codes. So your biggest struggle is touching your forehead with your ankle.
Search for QuickBooks. Perfect for making tax digital. QuickBooks. Backing you.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8 minutes to 9. Jacqui Smith, Zack, Polanski, Nimco Ali and Christian May with me to answer your questions. Grace is in Bow. Hello, Grace.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Evening. What would you like to say?
My question is, should anti-knife crime protesters be protesting as hard as the Extinction Rebellion for their case to be heard by the government and for it to be taken seriously? Because I know that not enough is being done. We all talk about lessons to be learned, and we're making all these programs, but there are boys dying every single day, mothers crying every single day, every single time, and I don't see it as a priority, especially in London. So should they be protesting as hard as the anti-rebellion protesters?
Really good question, Grace. Maybe they should dress up as bees.
No.
Zack, Polanski.
No idea what you're talking about. And I think, first of all, let me say this before people accuse me of being soft on crime, that anyone who takes a knife and plunges it into any body part of anyone should feel the long arm of the law. However, I don't think it's as easy as just talking about knife crime. I think it's a very right-wing tabloid. I'm not saying that about your caller, but I think we've been whipped up into believing that this is some sort of sensational thing that's going on that we have to stop now. And I think we really need to look at the causes of this. So one thing, for instance, is Sadiq Khan, London Labour Mayor, constantly says that or doesn't constantly, but he's talking about stop and search. Well, actually, there is no evidence that stop and search actually does anything to reduce knife crime. In fact, there's lots of evidence that all it does is cause more kind of more tension between minority communities and the police.
Let's just concentrate on the question, though, because we could have a long discussion about the causes of knife crime and what to do about it. But this is... Grace is asking, how does it get up the political agenda? Should knife crime knife crime protesters be adopting the tactics of Extinction Rebellion?
Yeah,
because
I've got a much shorter
they
answer
have
then.
been successful.
So as you know, I was arrested with Extinction Rebellion protesting the climate emergency. I believe that's the number one priority.
I'd be surprised if you hadn't.
Exactly. Yes, I think knife crime is incredibly important. There are people dying, and I think it does need to be pushed up the agenda. I think anything campaigners can do to make the political will happen needs to happen.
Nimco.
So I'm going to be very controversial. The fact that a lot of the people that are dying are young black men, and the people that are stabbing these young black men are other young black men, and black communities within London all vote Labour. Labour don't care. I'm just going to say that Sadiq Khan does not care because you're still going to keep voting for him. What the black and ethnic minority community need to do is actually take their votes and go for somebody that cares about them. So the whole point is the fact that if you move your votes away from the Labour Party, they will start caring.
Agreed.
And the reality is, so you have to politically organise and say the fact that you are a voting bloc, you are a community, so you do actually on a day-to-day basis elect these MPs, local mayors, councillors, and those people, because they don't have to deliver for you, don't actually need to do anything at all. So I would say
cynical view.
It's not a very cynical view. It's like, I say this as an FGM activist that, like, you know, FGM affects a negligible number of the population, but to make it political, you had to make it you had to get it into the media. In 2015, I got every single political party to put FGM into the manifesto because I made people care. You have to make people care. And if the mayor of London today was Zack that was elected in 2016, he would care because he would be thinking that young black men are dying on the streets of London, and other people would care. Sadiq Khan doesn't care because black people, Muslims, ethnic minorities are still going to keep voting for him. White middle class people are still going to keep voting for him because they think, oh, it's great to have a ethnic minority mayor. So the idea is that there is no threat to his position of power, and I have 3 incredibly beautiful young men who are my cousins, and I fear for them every single day because I know their death is not going to mean anything to the mayor of London. If the mayor of London was not Sadiq, I can say that.
How can you say that Sadiq Khan does not care if young black men die through knife crime?
Because it doesn't affect his political. He knows he's still going to get elected if he stands.
He's not just a mayor of London. He's a human being.
No, he can have a personal feeling, but he doesn't have a political agenda to really care. So I mean, politically, sort of the conversation we're having right now is, do they need to, like, you know, what is the political motive they need to do? You need to politically organise. And I would just say that if you guys stop voting...
Did Jacqui Smith not care about knife crime when she was Home Secretary? That's effectively what you're saying.
It is what you're saying, Nimco, and it's wrong.
No, but the whole point is that you would care as a Home Secretary because you were the Secretary of State for the whole country.
But I still care now. I do things in Birmingham now about knife crime. It's just not. I don't think it's helpful to say that because you're in a particular political party, you don't care about knife crime. I think Grace makes a really strong point about whether or not crime. I say this as a young woman who grew up behind the Labour Party in Cardiff, saw FGM happening, nobody cared. Early forced marriage was happening. What you just said was that nobody cared about knife crime. And
I said Sadiq Khan doesn't care about knife crime in London. We're not talking about the Labour Party as a general in terms of the whole point.
We're talking about time, so Jacqui, say what you want to say.
I don't think that the political parties have spent enough time talking about crime in this election, any of them, and that. To that extent, Grace makes a very fair point, but equally I don't think there's a competition between tackling climate change and tackling knife crime. I think any serious politician has to do both.
Christian?
Well, I think it is easier to take a day trip to London, Trafalgar Square, and dress up as a bumblebee and hand out some leaflets. It is obviously much more complicated to organise a mass protest movement against knife crime, not least because I don't know if there's an agreement over what you're going to be protesting for. You're going to be protesting against stop and search or for stop and search, against alienating communities or bringing them together. Are you going to be campaigning for tougher sentences or for more youth services? So it's very complicated in that sense, and it does unfortunately fracture down party lines.
Final text question from Beth in York. Iain, some NATO leaders were caught on camera gossiping about President Trump today, that would be Justin Trudeau, which resulted in an awkward confrontation between Trudeau and Trump. Can you recall a similarly embarrassing moment with a politician or a celebrity you've met? Jacqui, I'm sure you've got a whole list.
Well, I did in 2001 have John Prescott come to my constituency the day after he'd had that, not hidden, but rather public contretemps where he punched a protester, which, of course, at the time everybody thought was going to be a nightmare for Labour, but turned out actually to be rather popular for John. Not that, incidentally, candidates, I would encourage anybody to go around punching the electorate. And what we did with him was set him rather quietly on a very nice balcony overlooking a lake in Redditch so that he could have a calm moment after the excitement of the day before.
Did you have another incident with John Prescott earlier on in your political career where you had to climb up a ladder or something and he was at the bottom?
No, he wasn't at the...
Oh, he wasn't?
He wasn't at the bottom. John Prescott came to look at the electrification of a railway line. My agent quite rightly said to me, follow him wherever he goes, which involved climbing up the side of a train wearing a skirt, because that was the olden days when women electioneering didn't so much wear trousers. My agent had to stand at the bottom of the stairs in order to prevent anybody else looking up my skirt.
See, this is how rumours start, isn't it? Christian?
Yeah, what I loved about the footage of those world leaders gossiping, albeit that in Buckingham Palace, is it's just like the drinks reception after any conference, party conference, corporate conference. I remember at a party conference when I worked for the IOD, the business lobby group, hosting one of a number of drinks receptions that evening, and in walked Keith Vaz, and I walked over to him.
What's coming now?
And I said, thank you. I said, thank you for coming. And he said, I'm just going to stick around here so I don't have to go to the IOD reception. And I just sort of looked at him and told him, well, I'm sorry to tell you that you're at it. You're here. Let me get you a drink.
Wasn't he at it? Nimco Ali.
No, I was just going to tell my story of the fact that when Diane Abbott didn't recognise me because I had different hair. So she came up to me, introduced herself, and I said, I know it's Nimco. She said, oh, sorry, then just walked away.
Oh dear, that's a bit
rude. Well, I seem to rub up a lot of people on the Labour Party, the wrong way. So.
Well, saying what you did about knife crime, I'm not surprised.
I stand by it.
I stood outside the Labour manifesto meeting the other day lobbying MPs. I spoke to John McDonnell. He was fantastic about proportional representation. I tried to speak to Emily Thornberry, who I won't repeat kind of what she said entirely, but she just said that maybe I was speaking to the wrong person about proportional representation. Also, very, very briefly, I was ushering once at a theatre where Scottish leader of Liberal Democrats, Willie Rennie, was due to speak. It said his name on the seat. A man was sat there. I said, you're okay there for a minute, but when Willie Rennie arrives, you're going to have to move, and you can guess what you're going to say.
I think you win.
Is that why you left the Liberal Democrats?
Exactly.
Thank you all very much indeed. Jacqui Smith, Zack Polanski, Nimco Ali and Christian May. And Jacqui Smith and my podcast, For the Many, you'll get a new edition on your phone if you subscribe to the LBC Election 2019 podcast feed tomorrow morning. Coming up in a minute, we're going to be asking what should be done with British-born jihadi fighters. Should they be repatriated to the UK? You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9:02.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, NATO leaders have issued a joint statement of unity after their 70th anniversary meeting in Hertfordshire. The summit was overshadowed by a series of disagreements. In one row, Donald Trump called the Canadian Prime Minister two-faced after footage emerged of Justin Trudeau appearing to mock the president. However, he played